Blake Lively, in her case against Justin Baldoni and the Wayfair parties, has made a ton of sanctions requests to the federal judge, a lot of which haven't been ruled on yet, but the judge did just hand down a ruling on one of these requests, where Blake Lively had asked Judge Liman to hand down sanctions on Bryan Freedman, Justin Baldoni's lead attorney, for statements he had made about Lively in the press. In the motion that was filed over 8 months ago, Blake Lively asked for sanctions against defendant's counsel Bryan Freedman. Ms. Lively respectfully submits that the court should impose sanctions against Mr. Freedman as a consequence of his relentless media campaign to harm Ms. Lively's character, credibility, and reputation. And a lot of those statements by Freedman to the press were in defense of Justin Baldoni in light of the things that Blake Lively was saying about his character and the accusations she was making against him and Bryan Freedman's other clients, the Wayfair parties. The judge has now denied Blake Lively's motion for sanctions against Freedman, and I'll read that order in just a second. But in defending Bryan Freedman's statements, I'll go back to the document where they responded to her sanctions requests. They wrote, Mr. Freedman's statements were not made in a vacuum. As recognized by the express exceptions to Rule 3.6, lawyers have a right, indeed a duty, to publicly defend their clients. Put another way, nothing in Rule 3.6 divests a lawyer of his or her right to defend against adverse publicity promulgated by an opposing party or his or her counsel. In fact, this court has recognized a lawyer's right to speak out. There can be no serious dispute that Miss Lively and her lawyers, sometimes euphemistically called spokespersons, have disseminated a barrage of negative statements impugning Mr. Baldoni and the Wayfair defendant's credibility, character, or reputation by alleging, among other things, that Justin Baldoni lied about his long-standing commitment to women's rights and betrayed victims of sexual abuse. For instance, and then they go down a list of comments made by Lively's legal team or others related, where they've just absolutely trashed Justin Baldoni in the press as some sort of abuser. And I hate when they overuse this term Darvo. She even paid the Darvo expert to speak on her behalf and to write up a report, which is just sad, honestly. Because when an expert gets paid to defend one side of a situation like that, it's like, of course, it's going to be favorable to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be using that expert. She wasn't there. She's just giving her expert opinion based on one side of the story, which is, terrible because she is the person who coined Darvo. And then now people who actually need to have serious discussions about real cases involving Darvo are going to point to this one and be like, look, what a joke. And that sucks for people who actually rely on that expert's opinion and her work to apply to their own lives and their own actual abusive relationships, which is one of many reasons why so many people are passionately against Blake Lively's case. There simply was no Darvo here. But I'm getting off topic, so let me just circle back to the ruling here. Plaintiff Blake Lively moves pursuant to New York Professional Conduct Rule 3.6 and FRCP 16F for an order granting sanctions against Bryan Freedman, counsel for the Wayfarer parties. Plaintiff asserts that Freedman should be sanctioned for making extrajudicial statements commenting upon her character and credibility that will have a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing the adjudicative proceedings in this matter. The statements were made between 8 and 11 months before the then scheduled trial date in this matter. Now remember, trial was supposed to happen this month, but it got moved back to May 18th because there were a couple of criminal trials that needed to take priority. So the judge says here, assuming without deciding that Freedman's statements were not protected by the safe harbor provision in Rule 3.6d, plaintiff has not shown that those statements, given when they were made, are substantially likely to prejudice any adjudicative proceedings in this case. Accordingly, the motion is denied. And you'll notice that Bryan Freedman has been a lot quieter in the press these days. So the judge looked at their arguments about Rule 3.6 and the exceptions to Rule 3.6, and he was like, nah, I'm not even going to bother with that. He just says that Blake hasn't shown that the statements, given how long ago they were made, has, shown that they're substantially likely to prejudice her proceedings. And Blake Lively made a whole slew of requests in this nature saying that it was going to prejudice her proceedings and that what he said was attacking her character, credibility, and reputation, but they really weren't much different, if at all, than the things they were saying about Justin in the press. So people will ask, why does the judge do XYZ for Blake Lively's side when they don't for Wayfair? And a lot of times it's because the Wayfair parties don't ask for this stuff. They're not trying to badger the judge with everything imaginable. Where Blake Lively is. I mean, I don't even know how many sanctions motions from Blake Lively are still sitting with the judge. So Bryan Freedman is in the clear on that one. But in case you missed it, there are, some ongoing potential issues related to Bryan Freedman's statements to the press in defending Justin Baldoni. And that has to do with the state case filed out in California where Bryan Freedman himself has been sued And I did a video on this the other day. I'll put a link in the comments below if you missed it. But in that case, the surviving spouse of Travis Flores and Travis's estate have sued Bryan Freedman personally because of the statements that he's made on Justin's behalf when he was asked about it in the context of the Blake Lively case. So, of course, the press badgers him with questions about this because he's now defending Justin Baldoni against Blake Lively, whereas he formerly represented Travis Flores against Justin Baldoni. So he said statements to the press along the lines of, during the course of that litigation, we found that no one was at fault, that Justin and Wayfair are exceedingly honorable, and that really upset Travis's surviving spouse. And so he sued Bryan. Some of it was for defamation and breach of privacy, I think it was, invasion of privacy, based on those media statements on behalf of Travis, who passed away, unfortunately, in 2024. And Bryan Freedman filed an anti-SLAPP motion, basically saying that his speech was protected. It was in the context of him representing Justin Baldoni as a client, also protected by the First Amendment. And while some of the claims from the surviving spouse will go forward, and those are basic malpractice type claims, so they're not something that should be covered by the anti-SLAPP statute, which is what the judge wrote up in his ruling, basically. The defamation part of it, the breach of privacy, it was that was thrown out. So Bryan Freedman's media comments alone were not a reason to punish him with the courts. But in order to get some of their claims to move forward in the court, they had to call into question the true and fair report aspect of Bryan Freedman's speech, which means they had to attack Justin Baldoni's character and question whether or not Justin Baldoni was, exceedingly honorable. What some people will find upsetting is that Claire Wineland's mother, who had previously, sung Justin's praises and had, as recently as 2024, less than 2 years ago, on Instagram was singing his praises for all he's done for the CF community and for being a friend. In fact, she said, "Thank you for your friendship and your commitment to Claire and the CF community. You're making quite an impact." Claire Wineland also unfortunately passed away. However, Claire Wineland passed away back in, I think it's been 7 or 8 years now. And she was part of the inspiration, I believe, for Justin Baldoni's project, 5 Feet Apart. She was a consultant for the project. And Melissa Yeager, her mother, has now, filed this declaration in support of the lawsuit for Travis's surviving spouse and his estate, basically calling, Justin into question and some of his motives. And it's kind of ridiculous because, first of all, everybody who makes a project, even if it has something to do with terminal illness, is going to get paid for their work. That's part of the job. That's how they can continue doing what they're doing. This whole criticism about him exploiting, people's terminal illness or stories or whatever to make money, that's ridiculous. That's his job. You can do work that you're passionate about and that you find meaningful and that you think really matters, but you should still get paid for your work. So that in and of itself is kind of ridiculous. I think the judge's ruling in that regard is a little shaky, but I'm not an attorney, so I'm hesitant to go too hard on that. You know what I mean? But the judge isn't saying that Bryan did anything wrong. He's just saying that the anti-SLAPP statute alone is not enough to have those claims thrown out. So a couple of them were dismissed that were based just on Bryan's statements relating to Justin in the context of his representation of Justin in the Blake Lively case. But then we have a couple of other things that will move forward, and it'll have to do with Bryan's performance as Travis's attorney in the lawsuit that he had against Justin a while back. I don't really see much coming of that. I don't know if it'll even go to trial. Those claims could end up being dismissed on other grounds. It just wasn't an anti-SLAPP, dismissal for 3 of the 5 claims. As for the declaration that they used to defend some of those claims against the anti-SLAPP, it really sucks that Claire isn't here to speak for herself. I think that maybe she would have said those things. I will never know, And I'm not here to bag on Claire or her mom, but I will say this. It at least looks questionable. It looks questionable. If you are praising somebody the way that Melissa Yeager has and the way that Isabella had, and then all of a sudden you flip a switch when there's a lawsuit, that's going to be a problem. It's going to be something that can use to call your, sincerity and truthfulness into question. I think that was a last-ditch effort to make sure some of the claims move forward. I think it's disappointing, but, we'll just have to wait and see how it turns out. We're still waiting, of course, for the judge to rule on the motion for judgment on the pleadings, the motion for summary judgment, and then the spoliation sanctions motion that they had a hearing about back in January. I think it was January 22nd. I was able to go there myself and see the arguments. I don't know when we're going to get a ruling on that. Honestly, it could be a while longer. These things take time. So that's all I got for now, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button for me because that really helps me out, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.